Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our session on commerce media called Commerce Media's Moment, Navigating New Channels to Drive Sales, which was made possible by Fluent. Thank you, Fluent. I'm Sarah Marzano. I'm a principal analyst here at eMarketer, where I keep a close eye on retail media, as well as the broader commerce media landscape, which we are forecasting will generate over $70 billion in ad sales in 2025. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to be digging into commerce media, discussing everything from emerging trends to the pervasive challenges that keep us up at night. I'm joined today by three special guests. Cely Moreno-Mosier, Senior Director of Retail Media Partnerships and Shopper Marketing at PepsiCo, calling in from Dallas, Texas. Hi, Cely. Jeffrey Bustos, Vice President of Measurement, Addressability, and the Data Center at the IAB, calling in from Brooklyn, New York. Hi, Jeffrey. And PJ Triboletti, Vice President of Business Development at Fluent in Philadelphia. Hi, PJ. Before we get in, let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in throughout the session. All right, let's get started. I'm so excited to bring the three of you together for today's conversation because I think together you each bring a unique perspective thanks to your role across the industry. To get us started, it's November. In addition to being on the cusp of the most important season in retail, we're also closing out what I think has been a really extraordinary year in commerce media. The past 12 months has seen a wave of innovation from retail media power players, as well as the entrance of several non-retail media networks that are setting up to redefine the commerce media landscape as we know it. So for my first question, I want to cast a wide net to kick off our conversation and set up the parameters for what we'll discuss today. I'd love to ask each of you to weigh in on just one or two of the themes from this past year that are really top of mind for you as we go into 2025. PJ, let's start with you.
Thank you for having me. I think first thing that comes to mind, obviously with the timing right now, is the holiday season and the consumer propensity to spend for this upcoming, next 60 days that are paramount for the entire retail system. But also like the emergence, as you mentioned, into non-traditional retail market in this media segment. So could be PayPal or United Airlines and travel launching. Really interesting to see where this goes in 2025, but a lot of very prominent power players are joining this commerce media space.
Absolutely. It's an exciting time to say the least. Jeffrey, what about you?
I think kind of what PJ say with the holidays, I think that's going to have more brands are going to put more pressure on retailers to really deliver in performance. Inflation's still top of mind to consumers, and there's still the basket size that consumers are thinking about. So I think that retailers are going to get smarter with measurement, and especially as we get the new non-retail media, non-endemic commerce media networks, I think it's going to create more competition with existing retailers and them having to really prove out that performance. So I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, the holidays can tell us so much about the consumer's mindset, and we're definitely coming off the end of a really high pressure time for a lot of consumers. So it'll be interesting to see what the next 6 weeks or so brings. Cely, what are you and your team watching closely right now?
There's a lot of talk and excitement about in-store growing commerce media in the future. So I think the holiday season is the perfect time to really bring that to life. So I'm really going to be watching out for not just what in-store media looks like, but how it brings that whole cohesive path to purchase experience together between online and offline. So really curious about that. And then the second one, from an advertiser standpoint, frankly, I'm also going to be looking at just this crowded space of RMNs, right? There's a lot more that are coming out. And as an advertiser, our budgets continue to be very discerning based on ROI and who's really going to stand out for next year.
Yeah, thank you all. I think that the range of topics we just listed kind of brings into focus just how much there is to discuss. So I want to make sure we get to as much of that as possible in the next 30 minutes that we have together. I want to stick with the topic of proliferation that you just brought up, Cely. As a national CPG brand, you certainly have no shortage of potential retailers who are vying for investment, particularly as you mentioned, the retail media landscape grows more and more crowded. I think it would be so interesting to hear how you and your team are evaluating retail media networks. Is scale and size sort of the end-all be-all deciding factor, or are there substantial ways that small and mid-sized retailers can think about standing out from the crowd? What are you taking into consideration when you're thinking about where to invest?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Scale is definitely important to us, and we take that into consideration with a lot of our national brands. But we also have very different problems to solve between those brands. And so there are some other things that I would say stand out in terms of when we are looking at RMNs. The first one is true addressable audiences. Can we really reach the right consumer based on the problem that we're trying to solve? So not just the generic lapsed users, et cetera, but who are we looking for? What are they, what cravings do they have? Like what's their purchase tendency? Are they somebody who, is in the category, but perhaps is looking for something that's more permissible? So the fact that we want scale, but we also want precision is incredibly important to us. The other thing that I would say is we are really looking at advanced capabilities, in particular with creative. So despite us knowing that there are brand lovers out there that love our national brands, we also know that they also make their choices very differently. It's not a one-size-fits-all creative landscape. So the more we can get to dynamic creative optimization, the better, right? So somebody may be looking for a large family pack for their big families, smaller households may be looking for single serve. Some folks might be a little bit more price sensitive, and the more that we can adjust our creative based on those behaviors, the better. And I think finally, if we've ever had a chat before, you'll know that measurement is still table stakes for us. Incremental growth in particular is incredibly important as we justify our investments, not just this year, but in the future. It's going to become harder and harder to justify those investments without those incremental growth capabilities.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. And you hit on so many sort of valuable points, especially for anyone in our audience who's part of a smaller mid-sized retailer and who's thinking through how do we hone our value proposition, particularly when it comes to reaching really specifically, targeted, addressable audiences who can solve for a very specific problem. So I think that is such a sort of salient point, again, for our audience members to really keep top of mind in terms of thinking through, like, how do we set ourselves apart in this crowded landscape? What's different about the customer that we can reach, when they can reach them, what the demographics are? I want to stay on the topic of proliferation in the space. Cely, I'm so glad you mentioned measurement as a key component. One thing that we are still hearing often is how challenging advertisers are finding it to scale their ad buys, especially across an increasing number of platforms when there's still a considerable amount of work to be done in terms of things like standardization and transparency. So Jeffrey, I know that late last year, I believe it was, the IAB first published a set of retail media measurement guidelines that were really designed, at least in part, towards addressing these challenges. So I think the timing of today's conversation is great to sort of check in with you on what you and your team have been hearing and sort of what you've learned over the past year following the release of those guidelines. And what do you think is the most important thing for retailers and advertisers to focus on moving forward?
Yeah, I think that when we look at retail media and with the proliferation, the first problem that retailers will start facing next year is that it's kind of their greatest strength is the personalization aspect of retail media, but that's kind of now there's a human capital. I know that sounds terrible to say, but there's a human capital problem in retail media. It's very expensive, it's very resource intensive to run 10 retail media networks. I can run a $60 million paid search campaign with 8 people. I did it when I was at MediaCom. You can run it really well. You can't do that in retail media. So a lot of what we're going to be working on next year is, one, we're working a lot with ad tech companies to ensure that they are working and developing technology to adapt to the standards. So obviously it's a slow moving process because technology needs to be aligned to it and then retailers need to adopt it. But then the next part is also ensuring how can you ensure that there's more automation and consistency across retail media buys so that you can easily buy across different retail channels. One of the really exciting things is that we've seen Instacart was the first retailer to actually get certified in most of the standards that we released. And then Walmart right now is actually in the process of that audit. saying that you're aligned to standards, it's a 6 month to 1 year process. It's a very intensive process where the MRC goes with EY and they audit everything internally to really ensure that you are aligning to the standards. But I think, yeah, moving into next year and, as brands get smarter, another thing we're also going to be doing is releasing a sort of evaluation kit that brands can use to really help them evaluate retailers and really compare them and look at their current capabilities and evaluate, the tiering of it. We won't be doing it. It's a toolkit that brands can tier them because obviously brands have different objectives or different retailers. But I think that moving into next year, it's going to become much more competitive, especially as we bring all these new media networks. Retailers need to prove performance. They need to prove that value to brands. So it's that we'll see much more adoption of those standards into next year and into 2026.
Yeah, I think you hit on some really interesting points there around how resource strapped I think many retailers are finding themselves as they look to really build out sustainable and scaled growth. And I'm curious, just as a follow-up, as retailers are sort of considering the work it might take to adhere to some of these standardized ways of working, which will hopefully pay off with advertisers who are otherwise feeling fatigued and strapped themselves in terms of budgets. How do you advise retailers who are sort of weighing out, look, I'm already strapped for resources. This feels like a lot of work to get to that end goal that's going to pay off. Like, how should retailers be thinking about that challenge?
I would really recommend in them thinking in terms of aggregation. Unless you're a very large retailer with significant budgets, what we're probably going to start seeing, maybe not next year, but 2026, is the ability to buy across a beauty, sort of like beauty media network package and a grocery, media network package or a C-store package, just because there needs to be the ability for brands to scale. If you think about programmatic and the online landscape, it works because I can reach millions of people really fast. Like even when you think about CTV, and even if you look at like in-store retail media and CTV has grown faster than in-store. And that's because I can run the same video ad across linear, CTV, Disney, YouTube, pretty much every platform with the same ad formats. You can't do that today on retail media. On-site ad specs, which is something we're going to be addressing next year, is if every single retailer has different ad specs, it becomes very costly to do on-site display. So again, there's a lot of things that retailers need to evaluate. Like, are we going to bring more consistency into our platform to ensure that there's scale? If you're a larger retailer like Amazon, Walmart, you don't really need to. But if you're the smaller one, then it really behooves you to align to create specs on the IAB, because as brands, they don't have money to create specs for 20 retailers. That's very expensive, and brands rather invest that money in media instead of creative or human resources. So I think that retailers need to evaluate, do you want brands to invest in your media network, or do you want them to invest in human capital? And I think that will move them in the right direction.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nods from my panel, which I think just sort of speaks to the importance of the work that you're doing. And I love what you said about thinking through like the long tail of retail media networks who really stand to benefit from easing the workload on advertisers, right? Because one thing that we watch really closely here at eMarketer is how the share of spending to retail media networks beyond some of the biggest power players shifts or evolves. And what we've seen is that although the total pie is getting significantly larger, right, the total spend on retail media is getting bigger, more and more retailers are entering the space, and the share of ad spending that's going to the long tail isn't increasing. So it's going to be more and more important for those retailers to really think through how they can vie for those limited budgets from advertisers. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here for the next question. As the industry matures, one thing that we're seeing is that retailers are really thinking through how to sustain continued growth. And with that, there's a trend that has stood out over the past year as being something that's grown quickly from being kind of nascent and lesser known, which is non-endemic advertising. So we saw a flurry of announcements about non-endemic advertising in the second half of this year, ranging from major retail media networks like Walmart to folks in more specialized corners of the industry. I'll pause briefly and just clarify for our audience that when we talk about non-endemic advertising in retail media, we're referring to the practice of retailers who are selling ad inventory to advertisers promoting products, brands, or services not directly sold by that retailer. So we're entering this new world where increasingly a number of retailers are not only courting investment from the endemic advertisers promoting products directly sold by that retailer, but looking to demonstrate their value to non-endemic advertisers from outside and adjacent industries. Anything from financial services, insurance, automotive, and more are now sort of at play. PJ, I know Fluent does a lot of work in the non-endemic space. I want to hear more from you on what some of the considerations, both for the commerce media network players themselves, as well as potential advertisers, for anyone mulling over the opportunity in non-endemic advertising.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that right now for non-endemic, especially from a retail or financial services perspective, it needs to come across as more of like a rewards-based cross promotion so that these non-endemic brands can go through and make it a direct collaboration with these companies to whether it's offering a discount or exchange for subsequent purchases, or it could be really effective in regards to a perk or reward for the consumer if it is to include for a dining or a streaming service with a free trial that is exclusive to them. And it's almost perceived as a thank you for making that purchase, which also provides essentially a stronger customer retention rate for that non-endemic partner. I want to also put into perspective with some of these newer entrants. I think that these placements are providing enhanced relevance through what you could call cross-industry insights and delivering these ads as more of a one-to-one tailored perspective, especially via post-transaction after the consumer has already gone through the entire process from adding to cart to making that transaction in moment. It provides these non-endemic brands opportunities to engage in a very highly contextual way. For instance, if a consumer was to buy some workout gear from Athleta, they may be served a post-transaction ad for a travel service or for a workout subscription trial from Peloton, or even for a nutritional or meal products that can be more to their broader interest. And it allows these retail media networks to go after dollars that are not as competitive in the pre-purchase moment, who are heavily focused on, as Cely said, ROI or return on ad spend, but much more for these non-endemic brands. They're purchasing on LTV. They understand that this consumer has a credit card in hand. They just made a transaction. It is one of the only media placements in the world that a credit card is still in the hand of that consumer. And to sign up for a trial or to get this exclusive offer as a perception of thank you, or more of a digital insert that you used to get for those subscription boxes that come every month, it provides a really nice strengthening to that relationship, as you're essentially the last thing that that consumer sees before leaving the retailer's page. So for us, it's exciting, but it also gives a tremendous opportunity to generate CPMs after the purchase that could be 20 times higher than you're generating through that purchase process.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you hit on, like you very well sort of described the great opportunity that's available in terms of thinking through messaging that is mutually beneficial and really puts the customer at the heart of what the retailer and the non-endemic advertiser are activating on. But you also hit on some of the challenges and complexity in terms of considering the different goals that different advertisers will have and making sure that as the commerce media network, you can sort of speak to those different cohorts of advertisers, which I think will be so important for any network who's looking to sort of burnish their toolkit by incorporating non-endemic advertising. I want to move to another of what I consider to be the defining sort of characteristics of 2024, which is the, we've touched on it a few times in the discussion so far, but the influx of entrants from non-retail verticals. So in the past year alone, United Airlines, Chase, PayPal, and Expedia are among the companies that have announced the launch of commerce media networks that promise leveraging first-party and intent data to create targeted, relevant advertising. Our team at eMarketer has been working really quickly. We've put together forecasts for travel and financial media networks as these verticals sort of emerge as major cohorts looking to reshape the commerce media landscape. We're certainly in the early innings here, but it's kind of fascinating to think through how these new profiles stand to impact the space. Jeffrey, I wanted to take this next question to you. I'm curious how you and your team at the IAB are thinking through the emergence of these new commerce media models. Is this something that we should see as an opportunity or a threat for traditional retail players? Like, how are you guys sort of thinking through these changes?
I think it's going to be an exciting opportunity. I think that, well, the way we define retail media is that the place in which the ad happens is where the conversion or outcome happens. And obviously in these non-media, it doesn't happen within that same environment. But I think the emergence of these new media networks or commerce media is really there's going to be much more competition because they will actually have to prove out performance. They will actually have to prove out that they are driving growth for brands. So it's going to create a lot more competition with retailers to prove that performance as well, to be competitive within that media network space, especially as retailers trying to get non-endemic dollars. I think when we look at a lot of these new networks, I think when we look at financial media networks, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they're being leveraged. I think it creates a lot of really great opportunities in connecting with consumers and really understanding consumer behavior a bit more. I think there's a lot of potential there. And then when we think about it kind of long term, I think we'll start seeing much more collaboration between a retailer and an airline and a bank. I think we're going to start seeing that collaboration of data to really get much smarter. If making this up, not but let's say you're in a car ride, share ride app, and you ride to the grocery store and you saw an ad in the care share ride, and then you get to the grocery store and you buy the product. That data collaboration between both places can really provide that attribution. So I think it really provides an interesting view to the future. And then from a retailer perspective, I think they will start looking to them to see how they can start leveraging that data to really enable more non-endemic dollars. I think a lot of retailers are working a lot. We're seeing a lot of retailers have like financial ads at checkout. So they're going to start seeing how that kind of non-endemic experience works and see how they can bring that non-endemic experience into their environments.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's fascinating to sort of examine the profiles of each of these cohorts and see where certain verticals are able to bring in strength. I'm thinking financial services being able to bring in really interesting purchase data that is actually cross-merchant and therefore more expansive versus retailers who have really granular SKU and brand level data. And I would absolutely agree. I think that the opportunity for collaboration and knitting together fragmented purchase journeys is really where everyone should be sort of turning towards and kind of focusing on for the future. I think there are a lot of doors that are sort of being opened in addition to it becoming even more competitive. I want to turn to what I consider to be the heart of commerce media, which is retail. In-store retail media is growing quite quickly. In 2025, we're forecasting that ad spending on this format is going to increase by 46%. But to put that in perspective, it still represents less than 1% of all of ad spending on retail media at a total level. If we consider that more than 80% of retail sales still happen in person, physical stores represent a massive and largely untapped opportunity in retail media. So I would love to spend some time with this group focusing on what we see as the biggest opportunities when we think about introducing dynamic digital advertising into physical spaces, as well as outlining some of the challenges that maybe have held it back as a channel. And Cely, I think it would be great to start with you to hear about how you and your team are thinking through the new formats that are being gradually introduced into physical stores.
Yeah, I think there's still a ton of opportunity within store, but I think you mentioned there are lots of shiny objects. So we have to stay focused on what we truly believe is going to impact that path to purchase. And I do think digital dynamic advertising has a lot of potential. It's got the potential to truly bring that full brand experience to life when you think about it. If you can truly target someone at the right time of the day, know who they are, maybe customize to shopper demographics within the store or within the zip code. And you can also customize either creative or focus on trending products. It will become much more relevant to that shopper when they're in store. And as I mentioned, give it full circle from an omni-channel perspective, and then get as close to that point of purchase to help influence that purchase at the right time. from a challenges perspective, I think it's going to be, how do you do this efficiently? It's probably a big cumbersome project for the retailers that are out there, right? Technically, does this type of infrastructure even exist? Who are the right networks to partner with? How do you wire all the different tech that's out there in order to make this work the right way, for this to become relevant for the advertisers? Another challenge that I can think of is just integration with some of the antiquated systems that are out there, like POS systems. I can't imagine what that would look like from a heavy lift perspective. And also the fact that, you've got some very different format of stores out there. How do you make this work in a smaller store? How do you make this work in an older store? So I welcome any ideas from that perspective, and I look forward to seeing who can solve that. But yeah, lots of potential from an in-store perspective if we can get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about not getting too caught up focusing on the shiny objects. I think the digitization of physical stores is one of my favorite topics, but I have to sort of remind myself not to sort of only home in on like the most advanced technology and think realistically about the size of the sort of challenge as you think about the fleet of brick and mortar stores that most omni-channel retailers are looking at. And we think about the different sort of condition those stores are in and the upfront investment that it takes to bring in the technology and hardware needed to bring in-store retail media to fruition. Jeffrey, I know that the IAB is looking at physical stores. What is your take in terms of what it's going to take to sort of unlock doing this at scale? Like, how should retailers be thinking about what to even prioritize, what probably seems like a mammoth undertaking?
Yeah, I mean, to what Cely said, I think they're retailers have to what you said as well. Retailers have a huge challenge on how to do this. We recently released the in-store playbook and also in-store standards, and the objective there was to really ensure there was consistency in how retailers are doing in-store. We kind of wanted to get ahead on what they did with online, and that there was no consistency. And we're like, digital-based place advertising already existed before this. Let's continue measuring it the same. So I think retailers do have that challenge. I would say that just keep it simple. Like there's a reason that shelf blades and audio do really well. You don't have to go super digital. You can do, it just, how do you ensure that you're prioritizing the customer experience? Work with your merchant team, because at the end of the day, you're still a retailer. Retail media should not, the in-store should not be Times Square. It should be merchant. The objective of the store is to move product. So I think retailers that work closely with their merchant team to create plans for the in-store, to really see how you can bring, online consumer purchasing behavior to the store and you optimize that. I think those are the ones that are going to win. And, I would just keep it simple. I think people, audio, display ads is really, where you would start. And obviously you can get much more technical and then just finalize how you would measure, like really have really strong match market testing frameworks. And then more advanced would be like, how you bring identity from the in-store to online and get that on the channel. But I would just start simple.
Yeah, you hit on, again, so many important topics here. I think moving into stores is going to put a real emphasis on the need for retail media teams at retailers to really integrate with the merchant organizations, make sure you're putting the consumer first. And again, keeping things simple. I think it's fascinating what we're seeing retailers activate when it comes to formats like in-store audio, where a lot of the infrastructure is maybe already in place, right? And that can roll out in a bit quicker of time. And speaking of quick time, we are almost out of time for today's conversation. But before we go, we've been talking a lot about sort of big picture and looking into the future. I want to bring us back to the present moment. We talked about at the beginning sort of the importance of the upcoming holiday season. I'd love if each of you can sort of in a rapid fire way say, what you're watching most closely going into this next 5 or 6 weeks that are really going to be a make or break moment in retail. Cely, let's start with you.
I am excited to see how brands and retailers are going to be collaborating over the holidays. So truly unlocking that full funnel and how they make that work in collaboration.
Awesome. What about you, PJ?
I think that the holiday shopping and spending propensity will still remain pretty resilient. I think that there'll be a difference in shift towards intentional spending versus kind of disposable spending or splurge spending. And a lot of that will see a lot of smaller basket sizes, but overall, the next 60 days or so is so massive for retailers. They're going to do, 30-40% of their online transaction volume. And it's paramount to go through and make sure that they hit all of their targets and succeed.
Absolutely. Jeffrey, how about you?
To what Cely and PJ say, I think, retailers and brands need to think about the consumer basket. Like, I think we're entering a time this period where the basket, like consumers have $200 and that's it. And, how do you compete in a basket with inflation?
I love that. All right, Cely, Jeffrey, PJ, thank you again for this great conversation. We really appreciate it. And I think we got through some really exciting topics from today's discussion. Susie, Jeremy, I'm going to send it over to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks to the great panel. We're back, and we have another special guest with us, Sarah Lebo, Senior Analyst at eMarketer, and the host of our Reimagining Retail podcast that's out every Wednesday. We're so excited. You guys sent us a lot of great questions, so keep them coming. We're going to start with our first one. We tailored it a tiny little bit because we don't have the folks from Pepsi with us, but the question is basically, how can brands coordinate with broader consumer budgets to deliver the right pressure? So I guess it's like thinking about how do you budget to the right audiences for its brand. Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be different for every brand. This feels like such a basic answer, but the answer is breaking down silos. Retail media works. It's not clear where the retail media budget is coming from at a lot of companies. So you need to make sure that your shopper marketing people are talking to your merchandise people. You need to make sure that everyone is communicating and that you recognize that all of that money can go to the same place, can go to different places, and doesn't need to be siloed.
Right. And it's, I think, as we start to think about the path to purchase as well and how that's been changing and there's a different place where people are converting, I think that also matters as you think about your marketing mix and your ad budget so that you can really figure out what is the right place for your product, right? Like you said, there's some things that take forever before you go from, oh, I need this to making the purchase.
That's a great point because with Pepsi, your consumer has already heard of Pepsi, I don't know, 99 times out of 100. So your ad dollars are going to go a different place than a brand that sells on Amazon that is trying to beat out a different leggings brand that you maybe haven't heard of. They're probably going to invest more in search marketing than Pepsi will.
Yeah, I mean, there's, by the way, this is true, I think, for every brand, is it's all situational, but there's situations where you say, okay, we are making a major D2C push, right? So we have to do things like optimize our on-site, rather than focus on personalization and breaking down silos in order to ensure that like all of our budgets are working harmoniously.
Well, and that's a great point and leads us to one of our other questions, which is around as much money as brands spend on retail media, social media, search, basically on everything, how come they're not focusing more on their product pages and their digital shelf to make that spending more effective and efficient? So it's like, why aren't they thinking about that friction point that could potentially be happening once you've gotten someone to your website or into your store?
I mean, I think they are, but it's hard to think about everything. Brands want people to convert as soon as they'll convert. So they want people to convert in other places that aren't necessarily their website also. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on who you're talking to, only a fraction of your consumers are going to be shopping from your website. And for a lot of the companies from which retail media ad spend is coming, just CPG brands, you're not necessarily buying from that product page.
And by the way, Susie, you and I know this as like kind of a former CPG guy, former, retailer. I mean, if you go to your boss and you say, like, I need this budget to get people over, to performance marketing, I think is just generally it's easier to get that budget to make that to have that conversation rather than like CX. The CX is really bad. And that's why we're not converting people. So you really do need both.
Yeah. And it's very siloed, like you're saying, right? So the person who's responsible, the merchants are typically responsible for the product pages and they're looking for different things. And those dollars are much broader, right? It's like everybody needs to have better fit sort of criteria. Everybody needs to think about where the buy now button is. Like that's holistic versus on the retail media ad spend part, you're really thinking about a specific product to a specific spot. So I don't know that they're not spending time or energy on this. I just think it's a different bucket and it's much more holistic.
I do think that convincing people to give you money is a big theme this year. Convincing your CFO that marketing dollars matter, even if they're not resulting in an immediate conversion. I think that retail media professionals are tasked right now with demonstrating ROI in places where it's not necessarily coming immediately, where it used to be that search marketing with the automatic conversion. Now you need to demonstrate that top of funnel investment in retail media is worthwhile.
Right. And that kind of dovetails with the second part of the question, which is about in-store retail media. And so that digital activation, as we know, it's very expensive, and understanding how to measure the signage with a call to action is a lot easier than, as Sarah was saying, the radio or a sample station if you don't have a QR code attached to it. So I think that digital part of your question is much more around retail media, but the PDP page, it's much more agnostic, sort of.
I have an in-store hot take. I don't know if you guys will agree with this. I think the mobile phone is the in-store retail media mechanism, and that might not be captured as in-store ad spend because that ad spend might be taking place in app or on website. But I think the mobile phone is the answer to what Sarah talked about in the keynote with in-store retail media infrastructure being expensive and difficult. I think the phone is something people already have. It's something that they are already using in store. We always hear Roundel talk about like 95% of Gen Z or something is using their phones in store. And it's something that if it goes wrong, it's sort of your phone's fault and not the retailer's fault.
Yeah.
So I think that's where in-store retail media will come from. I think measurement's going to be really difficult then, because unless they're like on the Wi-Fi or being geolocated somehow, you won't necessarily know that they're researching on the phone and then buying in
And I think that's going to be part of it. They will be like I can imagine a world in the very near term where you use your phone, you scan a QR code, which is a specific QR code tied to that specific location within the store. They know whether or not you passed a certain display or if you're heading towards the checkout. So, it's going to get to be Minority Report-ish, but like not in a scary way. I think that if people just get value added ads in front of them instead of things that are just intrusive, then generally we have the data there. They tend to be more okay with it.
Right. And and that's for a lot of things in retail too, right? We think of the app as the epicenter, your mobile phone as the epicenter for loyalty. And so the more features you have, the more sticky it becomes, the better it is for the retail media component of that retailers, right? Because now they have a lot of data about you. They know what you're doing all the time, basically, and then they can service you the right ad. There was a minute where there was beacon technology where they were trying to do like the right ad when you're in front of Tide or Pepsi. I think that was so expensive to implement beacon technology that it was a little bit harder. But I'm going to switch gears now because it is commerce media.
Yeah.
And so this idea around the app and the digital screen and in-store digital sort of activations, what does that look like in some of the other industries? I mean, we've talked about travel, financial networks.
Yeah.
There might be other ones. What does that look like to you?
You're going exactly where I was going to go, because we talked about in-store. One of the things that stores will probably be investing in, that they already are investing in, is Wi-Fi, so that they know who's in the store, and also you can use their app in-store. Downside is you can compare things on your phone, but there are upsides as well. I think you're going to see more like Wi-Fi available on airlines as airlines realize that they can gain more revenues from you watching content on your phone than they can from you paying for a la carte Wi-Fi. I think that's one of the places that commerce media is going to change consumer behavior. I don't know if we're going to see more screens on seat backs versus pivoting to tablets and phones. That's something that's sort of been up in the air. That's sort of an airline pun.
Oh, great dad joke. That was
kicked off of this panel.
Yes. Can we cut to something else? Hold on, I'm asking our producers if anybody else is available.
Give me an earpiece, so I can say whatever I want. No, I do. And then I think that you'll also see a lot more integrations with retail, with intermediaries. So we've already seen Lyft and DoorDash partnering recently. They have similar but different business models. So they sort of have an enemy of my enemy is my friend situation against Uber. They're partnering together to knit those things together.
And Uber and Expedia, maybe, right? Which is something that's been rumored as a potential.
Yeah, or like, why aren't telecoms starting to do this? And they are. There's already one out there doing it. But I think you're right that there's going to be a lot more partnering so that you can data share. As long as you're not direct competitors, it'll be easier. There were so many other great questions, and I wish that we could answer more of them. We'll try and get to as many as we can at the very end of the day, so definitely keep them coming. Up next, we have another analyst-led panel, CMO Priorities in 2025, Integrating AI and Proving ROI with Cely Voss. Join Cely by clicking on Next Session above the chat on your right. And don't forget, if you have any issues, you may just need to refresh your browser after you join the session. See you soon.